Again, welcome back to the Dark Archives 2020 conference. And we just enjoyed a lovely presentation from Dr. Fagin Davis, which really kind of sets us off on a wonderful second half of the afternoon. Will mentioned in Colorado today, we've just had our first snow, so we're in a bit of shock as we try to comprehend. It is September, yes, right? All right, so I will ask, if you wish, feel free to participants and panelists alike, particularly participants, to post any questions in the questions and answers icon at the bottom of the screen. You can also use comments as well. We'll be monitoring those. We've also collected a number of comments and questions from Twitter, and we'll present those in just a minute. So since we have to do this a bit backwards, allow me to share Lisa's biography with you. Lisa Fagin Davis received her PhD in medieval studies from Yale University in 1993. She has cataloged medieval manuscript collections at Yale's University, the University of Pennsylvania, the Walters Art Museum, Wesley College, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Boston Public Library, and several private collections. Her publications include the Catalog of Medieval and Renaissance Manuscripts and the Binnick Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale, the Gothic Chalk Antiphonary, numerous articles in the fields of manuscript studies and codicology, and the monograph La Chronique Anonyme Universelle. Dr. Davis was a member of the EAMMS working group that established initial standards for electronic cataloging of pre-1600 manuscript material, and is currently serving on the advisory boards of the Digital Scriptorum, the Schoenberg database of manuscripts. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Davis, who is currently serving as the executive director at the Medieval Academy of America.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Roger. And thank you to everyone who's here and everyone who's asked questions already. We've had some really great conversations on Twitter. I've seen some things coming in on Discord, and I see we have people here in the room and some questions in the Q&A box. So how should we go forward, Roger?
Well, let's go ahead and start with this first question from Twitter, and this is a question from Mike Kestamont. He states, inspiring keynote by Lisa F. Davis at Dark Archives that made me fall in love again, exclamation point, with IIIFIO and the whole technology stack supporting it. Big clap. Question, which pedagogical resources do you recommend in this area? Are there resources or tutorials that talk you through the whole pipeline?
Oh, absolutely. And hi, Mike. I don't know if you're here today in person, but hello. So IIIF, everything having to do with IIIF is open access, free, downloadable. It requires only that you go to the IIIF GitHub. And I don't know if someone who has access to posting in the chat wants to just quickly go online and Google IIIF GitHub. They can post it in the chat as a link. And also the IIIF website. Both of those are full of really interesting and useful instructions and tutorials about how to set up your very own IIIF server and how to use IIIF functionality to engage with digitized material, not just manuscripts. The IIIF community has grown so far beyond manuscript material to include three-dimensional art objects and newspapers, and pretty much anything that can be digitized is now has a IIIF working group. There's a IIIF Slack, I'm told. I haven't quite figured out how to engage with Slack just yet. I feel like that's for the kids, but I'm working on it. So there's quite a lot of material out there, and it is all open access. It is all free, and there's plenty of ways that you can not only engage in it with IIIF yourself, but you can convince your institution that it doesn't have to be scary and it's not expensive to turn your institutional digital repository into a IIIF compliant repository.
Fantastic. And I will paste your comment back on Twitter into this comments field in a couple
yes,
minutes.
great. That included all those links. Thank you.
Yeah, you're way ahead of all of us.
Well, it's magic. IIIF does what I've been dreaming of literally my entire professional life. It allows you to digitally put things back together in a digital environment, and it really has made all of my dreams come true.
Well, can I ask you to kind of maybe expand upon that? So when you began your career working with manuscripts, and I think you hinted at this in your keynote, how would you say this has really transformed? That, you know, when we used to kind of really dive into the stacks of a library, we remember that, and we can still do that at a major research university. In the same way, how has that role changed for you working with manuscripts now in the digital age?
Well, in so many ways. So the work that I originally started doing almost, my goodness, 30 years ago. Wow, is that right? Yeah, 30 years ago. Was entirely analog, of course, by definition, because there were no digital manuscripts yet available, digitized manuscripts. And so when I started working with manuscript fragments at Yale, as I said in my lecture, it was all photocopies and cutting and pasting and trying to figure out how these fragments related to one another. And by being able to do it in a digital environment, for one thing, I can do it in my living room, which is very nice on my budget and on my travel. But also, as you may have noticed, I'm severely visually impaired, which is why I wear these dark glasses all the time. And if we were not living in a digital world, there's no way that I would be able to do the work that I do, because I simply cannot see well enough to work solely with analog real world objects. I really have to be able to have digital images in order to do the work that I do. So I'm incredibly grateful that I'm living in a time where even with this severe visual impairment, I can still do the work that I love and the work that I want to do, because this material is available.
Fantastic. So we have a second question here from Twitter. This is from Aslam Garcia Chow at Lisa Davis. Thanks for your talk. So rich that is impossible to summarize it for the medieval Twitter. I wonder if the work of a fragmentologist is over when reconstruction is impossible. The most ancient specimen of a codex leaf is this fragment, which we can do. What can we do with it? And this is an image from the British Library that is shared with us.
So that image is actually a really beautiful example of why fragmentology isn't actually a dead end form of research. So I don't know, can we share screens? Can we look at it? I don't know. Roger, can you pull up that tweet?
Yeah, let me go ahead and do that.
Okay, so it's a tiny little fragment. I'm not familiar with this object specifically. I'm assuming it's probably from the 3rd or the 4th centuries, if it is in fact one of the oldest parchment fragments of a codex, although I'm also curious to know how we know that this object is in fact from a codex. It's a tiny little scrap. But the truth is, even when you can't piece things back together, which is the really satisfying part, but oh wait, I might be able to, hold on. I think, nope, I can't do it either. Somebody here has screen sharing ability. At any rate, you can follow the link to the tweet if you want, and you can see this image. But there's so much to do, even when piecing things back together is only one tiny part of the study of medieval fragments and of medieval manuscripts in general. There's always transcription and translation and paleography, an analysis of the history of this little creature. You know, I mean, if this really is from the 3rd or the 4th century, it's really, really, really old. and it has a journey. It has a story to tell us. So even, and for the most part, most fragments are never going to find their sisters. They're never going to be reunited, even digitally, with the fragments that they were originally bound with. And so, but that doesn't make them less worthwhile or less worthy of study. You know, the hunt is part of it, the journey. It's not just about the destination. It's also about doing the research and contributing to this vast pool of knowledge. You think about how many codices, and we've seen this in other lectures in this very conference, trying to extrapolate how much is missing. And there's been lots of people who have worked on this problem, trying to figure out how many manuscripts we have today and extrapolating from that how many didn't survive for whatever reason. And when you start thinking about how many are fragmented and that we still have little pieces of, it's an enormous number. And the more of these get digitized, the more each one adds to our knowledge of the texts and the transmission and the scripts and scriptoria and art history and liturgy and music, math, science, everything. So every one of these little bits is an important piece of evidence. Whether it ever gets reunited, whether we ever find more, every single one is valuable because it is part of this corpus of medieval manuscripts, a material that has survived somehow for 1,000 years, 1,500 years, 2,000 years. And so every single little bit, I've got two, you can see them on the wall behind me, those two little fragments. That's 14th century, that's 15th century. Right behind me on the wall is a Spanish forger fragment, Spanish forger painting. They've all got a story to tell, even if you can't reconstruct the book that they came from.
Wow. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we have plenty of questions to move through, so I'll keep at it. So
right.
another question we have is from Ork Woodkey, and she was replying to you on Twitter, but she asked the question, to take this a bit further, we have to think about, well, let me stop here.
Oh, there it is. Thank you.
We had the fragment, so if you want to mention this again.
Yeah, there it is. Thank you. Yeah, so can we scroll down a little bit and see the whole image? There it is. So this is a tiny little thing. It's really hard to see what it is. It looks like it might be Greek, I assume, but it's just a few lines in a tiny little scrap. I don't know what the evidence is that this was a codex and not a scroll. Maybe because there's empty space at the top. I guess that could be the top margin right there, the top right corner. So I'd be curious to know more about this little creature. There's always a lot to say, right? We can transcribe it. We can try and use multispectral imagery to read the bits that we can't read. We can try to use XRF to determine something about the ink. We can try to, to use carbon-14 dating, some of the new, less destructive types of carbon-14 analysis to figure out the date. We can look at that red ink as opposed to the black ink. There's so much to look at. Looks like there's a little bit of paper there at the top. Where'd that come from? So, and I want to see the back. I always want to see the back. You know, the back is sometimes where the really interesting stuff is. All right, so go ahead, Roger, and read the next one.
Yes, ma'am.
So, sorry, that was really demanding. I'm sorry. Roger, would you please read the next question?
I'm a Texan and raised very southern.
My family's from Texas also, so.
Apologies to everybody else in the room. So the next question is from Ork Woodkey, and she states, take this further, we have to think of sustainable workflows to smoothly get findings of outsiders researching the digitized manuscripts back into the systems.
Yes.
So her question is this one: any hearings or sightings of a collaborative cataloging in this direction?
So this is a real bottleneck in the whole process. So you talk about public sourcing, group cataloging. When you put something online and you have a comment box, and someone can go in and say, "Oh, this isn't actually a 15th century Italian manuscript. It's actually 12th century, and it's from Austria." The next thing that has to happen is somehow that information has to be, if it's correct, right? You want it to be confirmed. You don't just want some random person coming in and saying, "Well, I think I know what that is." And so you have to, first of all, you want to have two opinions on something, if possible, and you want them to agree, ideally. And then you need to somehow get that information into the metadata so it's discoverable. And that has proven to be really, really hard. So there are a lot of websites, catalogs that allow you to submit a comment or to submit feedback or to submit a correction. But it takes a really long time, if at all, for that information to get processed enough so that it makes it into the metadata and the metadata is corrected. And I'm not sure what the answer is for that, because technical service librarians are really overworked. They have backlogs. They're trying to get records up in running. They're trying to correct records. They're trying to establish authorities. They have a lot they have to do. And so correcting metadata that's already up is not at the top of their list. And I don't blame them for that, because like I said, they have a lot, they're very overworked. Metadata librarians are really overworked. And I don't know what the answer is, but it is really challenging. For me, the shortcut that I've found is I go directly to the curator. I will email the curator and say, "Oh, by the way, there's a mistake in this data. If you could change it, that would be great." And sometimes you can get things done. The data can be corrected by the curator, because the curators normally have administrative access to their own records. But it is a really hard question, and I don't think we've found an answer yet for how best to manage that workflow. But I agree, it really is a problem that hasn't really been addressed yet.
Well, and it seems to be just the nature of our work. In many respects, a lot of us as scholars work we're trained to work kind of independently. And then now in this kind of new age, we really are always trying to figure out ways of collaboratively, interlinking efforts, because we know there are limits to what a single human being can do. So this is maybe part of this is cultural too, that we're trying to pull things together in new ways, and that is quite exciting, but challenging.
Yeah, no, it really is. It's a new model, right? I mean, the old model is an expert person catalogs it. That's the end, right? But now there are fewer experts and more material being digitized. So there is this real backlog. There are millions, literally millions of images online that have few, little, if any, metadata. And that's fine. As I said in my lecture, I'm all for putting an image online. You don't have to know everything about the object before you make it the record public, as long as you are willing and able to add to the metadata and correct the metadata if necessary.
Well, I'll take a chair's prerogative here, because you've hit the area that a question I wanted to ask you very much, which is I was very much so inspired by your talk, because I think it very much was a call to arms, like we have to do this. And there's this tension, I think, inside of academia that we have to do things perfectly, and rightly so, because we want to make sure that the research is solid, that it's peer reviewed, that it is that it can live at the time and it being tested. So kind of my question to you is the nature of kind of like whether it's cataloging or bringing new collections to life. Many of us who spend our lives in cathedral and municipal archives where there's really no digitization happening have kind of and now have accumulated large collections of digital manuscripts. What would you recommend to that PhD candidate who is working on their dissertation, but it recognizes what they have in their hands? Obviously, we want them to finish their work, but as they move into the next stage of their career, how would you advise them to take those collections and start to make them more widely available, especially in a period like this?
Well, that's a really tough question because on the one hand, we all want, we're greedy little medievalists. We want all the data, we want all the images, we want it open access, we want it free, and we want it now, right? Is that so much to ask? But you also, for students coming up the pipeline, they have to protect their work, right? They have to protect its potential for publication. So there, if you're doing work that is new and you're trying to get out on the job market, you can't risk someone scooping you, right? So you may not want to, if you have these images that have never been published, that have never been studied, and that are really exciting and are really important for your work, you may not want to make them public until you have a contract with a publisher. And, that's a problem with the tenure pipeline, that it doesn't encourage collaboration. You don't necessarily get credit in your promotion or job or application or tenure dossier for collaborative work. You get credit for that monograph, that published traditional monograph. And I work outside of traditional academia. I've never been on the academic job market. I've never been trying to get tenure. That's never been what I wanted. And so I don't have a problem sharing any of the work that I'm doing. I'll put it on Twitter. I'll put it, unless it's something where I've been told by a private collector not to share. Then I don't. But in general, I'll put everything out there. I believe very strongly that when you can, you should make your work freely available to anyone who wants to read it, right?
Right.
And in addition, of course, it's not like any of us in academia are making much money from the sales of our books, right? I can probably count on two hands how much actual royalties I've ever received for anything that I've ever written. But that's fine. I'm not complaining about that. But I really believe that that collaboration is the key. None of us are experts in everything, right? None of us know everything about everything. We all have places where we can respect and reach out to other people with different areas of expertise for their opinions and for their insight and their input. And that can only improve our own work. None of us are islands, right? It takes a village. How many platitudes can I throw out? We need each other. We really do. We all have our own little places in which we are expert, but we need to acknowledge the work of our colleagues and we need to acknowledge the expertise of our colleagues.
Wonderful. Yes, I think that's very true. So one last question from Twitter, and then we do have some in the comments field, and then also an open question in the Q&A. So we'll keep moving. Thanks everyone for participating and offering these questions. It really helps to kind of draw out the boundaries of this topic, and we're finding it's pretty limitless. So from Pablo Acosta on Twitter, we have highly engaging keynote by Lisa Davis, exclamation point. Thank you so much. Very simple question. Uh-oh, watch out.
No such
I
thing.
know. I know that Europeana, which is the kind of the digital middle library for museums for the European collections, is supporting IIIF protocol. But can you tell us how is this technology working in Europe from a fragmentologist point of view?
So I did answer this a little bit on Twitter. This is where, you may have noticed, I'm American, I live in Boston, and this is where you find a huge difference between the corpus of manuscripts in the United States and Canada as well, and the corpus of manuscripts in Northwest Europe. So if you're talking about the United States, a huge, almost more than half of the actual medieval objects held by libraries in the United States are fragments. So fragments are a huge piece of what any collection in North America has. And so they're being digitized because it's what we have. So in the US, that's happening by default because there's so many collections that only have fragments. And so if they're going to digitize their material, they're going to really focus on fragmentary manuscripts and fragments and single leaves. Whereas in Europe, you guys are spoiled over there. I mean, my goodness, I was lucky enough to go to the St. Gall Library a few years ago. There are 800 manuscripts before the year 1100 in St. Gall. I mean, come on. In the United States, you can count the entire corpus of codices written before the year 1100. You can probably count them on two hands, right? I mean, it's just, you don't find that over here. So in Europe, fragments are definitely second-class citizens in that they're really, you've got all these extraordinary codices waiting to be dug into. But one of the great things that Fragmentarium is doing, this resource, fragmentarium.ms, this resource based in Geneva that is entirely devoted to digitizing and cataloging and reconstructing and making fragments accessible as a scholarly resource. They are collaborating with the Staatsbibliothek in Munich and the Vatican Library and the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris on fragment projects, specifically so that these institutions will in fact start digitizing and making fragments available and turn their attention to them. And that has been a really effective strategy. If you go over to fragmentarium.ms and you look at what the BNF has put up, it will blow your mind. The fragments that they have got in these little binders and folders and bound together, they are extraordinary and they haven't really been made available before. So it's exciting stuff, especially for those of us who like the early things. There's uncials, fragments there. That's no big deal. It's 4th century, whatever, no big deal.
There is, I think, in the United States, there's a bit of professional jealousy we have for our European colleagues that have such close access. But I guess it makes it that much more special for us when we're there.
Well, it really does. And again, one of the things that I think our colleagues on the other side of the Atlantic really take for granted is you walk out your door and, oh, look, there's a 14th century building right there. There's a Gothic cathedral. You spend your whole life walking down the street and engaging and encountering medieval structures. You encounter the Middle Ages in a much more direct way than those of us who are medievalists on this side of the ocean, by which I mean medievalists studying medieval Europe, not, of course, medievalists studying the medieval in the native communities in the United States. That's a different situation. There are, of course, objects that are as old as the European Middle Ages in the United States, but that's a different subject. So if you're studying the European Middle Ages and you live on my side of the Atlantic, you're not gonna, you might go your entire life and never encounter an actual object from the Middle Ages. And so these fragment collections in universities and colleges and tiny little institutions all over the United States have a really important role to play in exposing students to the Middle Ages in a really real and direct way that really sparks imagination and excitement. When you get your hand, I mean, we all remember our first manuscript. Mine was at Brown University when I was an undergraduate. And when you get your hands on a piece of parchment that's 600-700 years old, it's chilling. It gives you this spark of excitement. And that's what students in the United States get to experience and don't take it for granted. And they're not jaded about it because they've never had that experience before.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Now we can clearly see why Lisa is the executive director of the Medieval Academy of America. All right. Before they pull me off with a hook, I better get to the next question, otherwise Stephen will remove me quickly. So Teresa Weber presents a question. Teresa Weber, yes. Lisa's point about visual impairment and how digitization has facilitated manuscript study for the visually impaired is another aspect of the voyages into the medieval unreadable. Is there anywhere a dedicated space online for advice on questions and issues of disability and medieval manuscript study? ? For example, as a teacher of paleography, I've encountered issues to do with different forms of dyslexia, but I'm acutely aware that I have been responding on a case-by-case basis in a somewhat uninformed way.
Well, that's a really interesting question. So the field of disability studies is not really about how to make things accessible to modern scholars, right? When you talk about medieval disability studies, you're talking about the study of disability in the Middle Ages. So that's kind of a different thing. But there really, as far as I know, I don't know specific guidelines or specific suggestions for medievalists. There are, of course, plenty of ADA, at least, in the United States, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, and there are ADA guidelines for how to best make your digital space accessible, both for the hearing impaired by adding captioning and subtitles, and also for the visually impaired by using larger fonts and thinking about your color schemes. I hadn't really thought about it as a paleography instructor. And in fact, I'm going to start thinking about this now that you've brought it up, because I will be, as of next semester, I'll be teaching paleography at Yale. And so that is something that I'll need to think about, is how to combine the digital access with the physical object to make them the object itself as accessible as possible. So really a really interesting question, and something I will absolutely start thinking about.
That's great. That's very helpful. So I wanted to kind of continue to make some notes in the chat. It's nice to hear voices in the chat for like Megan Smith. Her comment about publishing is imperfect as a radical and modern opinion. Mm-hmm. So refreshing to hear this opinion, sharing research. Academia claims to be multidisciplinary, but they aren't rewarded through reference for true multidisciplinary research. So sure. I think that's a helpful comment. Did you want to add anything, Lisa?
Well, I would, and here I'm really wearing my Medieval Academy of America hat, because one of the things that we are really trying to do is to advocate for some really significant and dramatic changes in the way that tenure works, and the way that the advancement works. We have so many scholars right now who are out of work, who are financially precarious, who are being pushed out of academia, who aren't able to do the teaching they want to do. And so there are lots of other ways you can be a medievalist. And I know this is totally off topic, and maybe, but if you go over to medievalacademy.org, you'll learn more about the work that we're doing there. But I think that's extremely important, that, you know, we're living in a world where the older paradigms don't really fit anymore. You know, I published this huge book 4 or 5 years ago, a critical edition, a translation of and a deep analysis of the Chronique anonyme universelle. And it was 10 years of work, a huge, huge amount of effort. And I'm glad I did it. I'm really proud of it. But I don't know that I'll ever do a book like that ever again. I'm not sure what the payoff was, especially because there's now a digital version through the Digital MAPA project, that I think is much more, is really useful in a different way, in that it can be updated. It's much more engaging and easier, and it's free, right? You know, academic books are really expensive. We all know that. And so if things can be made available in online and open access formats, which takes us back to fragments, that's always to the good. You know, I mean, we all need to make a living, right? We all do this because we want to put food on the table and a roof over our heads. And so you can't always give it away, right? You can't always just give your scholarship away because you're trying to earn a living. And that's really the give and take. That's the tension in all of this, is that we all love what we do. We wouldn't be medievalists if we didn't love what we do. But the challenge is always to figure out how to do this work, how to promote the Middle Ages, how to teach, how to engage digital, and do that in a way that also puts food on the table and a roof over our heads. And I see the quote from Anthony that it depends on the publisher. That's absolutely true. Medium Ivum is very reasonable. Arc Humanities has been putting out really fantastic little books at a very reasonable price. So yes, there definitely are publishers who are working on how to solve this, how to change the model. We're getting way off topic, I'm sorry.
No, I think the point of a conference like this really is about this discussion where we do see it takes us to lots of different places, and none of these things are in a vacuum. So
yeah, that's
this
right.
is very much so an open conversation. So it's very appreciated. I want to make sure to acknowledge two panelists in the room, both Natasha Domison and Louise Morowitz, who are serving as online moderators and are doctoral candidates at Oxford. They've been helping us to collect questions and are budding scholars in their own way. So thank you both for.
Yeah, their presentations were terrific. If you haven't watched it, go watch their presentation. It was great.
Yeah. So, and Natasha, Louise, if you have a question to end us with, that'll be great. But I'll hit the last one here from Lane at Sidwell. So in the Q&A, Lane at Sidwell asked, as individual libraries update their metadata, how can IIIF keep up with the updates? What problems can arise when they do not? I think Benjamin Albritton goes into this in his lecture, but what is your take?
Well, so this is the wonderful thing about IIIF, is that a IIIF image automatically brings with it into the shared space the metadata from the home institution where the record is, where the record lives. That's the whole magic of it, is that you don't have to worry about keeping up with changes in the metadata. The metadata is the responsibility of the home institution. So just to give you an example, so say there's a record at Harvard's Houghton Library. Those records are, those images are IIIF compliant. So that means when you take the manifest, which is the code that underlies the shared space, when you take that manifest and you mirror it into a different shared space, that metadata comes with it, partly, not all the metadata, but most of it. And so when that metadata is updated, it's automatically updated with the IIIF as well, because it's in the manifest. It's automatically encoded in the data. So that's one of the fantastic things about IIIF, is that it gets past that problem. Otherwise, say, if the record at Houghton is also found in, I don't know, WorldCat or the Digital Public Library of America or some other repository, if it's not served through IIIF, if it's not mirrored into another shared space, anytime they update the record at Houghton, they have to remember, oh wait, now I got to go to that other record in that other place and update it over there. And you can see how that very quickly becomes completely unsustainable. You just can't do that. And so the amazing thing about IIIF is that you don't have to worry about that anymore. The data curation is the responsibility of the institution that owns the object that has been digitized. And that's how it should be, right? This is your object. These are images that you're responsible for and a record that you're responsible for. And so it's your job to update that and for the whole world. I see Simon is asking, is there version control? I believe so. I think that you can revert, but I don't know. You would have to ask Ben Albritton or someone who is more deeply into the technical side, but I'm fairly certain that yes, you can revert to earlier versions of the metadata with IIIF.
Well, wonderful. I think we're at the last 2 minutes of our session today. So if there's some other comments in the field, if anyone, Natasha, Louise, if you have one last parting question, feel free to interject at this moment. And I'll just kind of wait just a moment. So,
and
Lisa,
thank you to Laura Moriale for doing some Medieval Academy promotion in the chat room. And thank you all so much for being here and these great questions. I am, as you probably know, I'm on Twitter pretty much all the time, regardless of the time of day or the time zone. So you can always tweet at me, and I'm always happy to engage in discussion and conversation. And I really look forward to the I look forward to the roundtable, which I guess is in half an hour. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
We take a half-hour break and then we come back and I'll be sharing the roundtable with all of my colleagues whose papers are part of this session. So please come back in 30 minutes, go get your coffee or a drink or whatever time zone you're in, and we'll have an opportunity to talk even more.